GSMC Sports Podcast. I'm your host, TJ Mabarty. We are coming to you live on a Wednesday afternoon. Today is October 16th. This is try number 2 here, considering we had some technical difficulties to open up the show. So unfortunately, we are going to have to scrap that first segment. But we do have an action-packed show today. Even still, we're going to be talking about some of the NFL action from this past weekend. We're going to be handing out the weekly panic meter, where on a scale from 1 to 10, we talk about how fans of teams that lost this past weekend should feel about their team moving forward. And then we are additionally going to be specifically doing a little bit of a deep dive into the Green Bay Packers, who dominated in their win this past weekend over the Arizona Cardinals, and we'll be discussing their standing in the NFC. And then we are going to, in the latter half of the show, be discussing some NBA topics. Kawhi Leonard, the Clippers superstar forward, will not be available to begin the season, it sounds like, shut down for the preseason, and he is not expected to be available for the season opener. So we'll talk about that specific scenario and what this season holds for the Clippers. And then to end off the show, we're going to be handing out a list here of the top 10 point guards for the 2024-25 season. So without further ado, diving in here into the panic meter headed into week 7. This is a segment that we do on a weekly basis. We rate teams based off of how nervous their fans should be following a loss in the previous week. 1 being no worries whatsoever, they are sitting comfortably, and 10 being hitting the panic button and having to make a drastic change. So the first team, as we always do, the loser of Monday Night Football. This week it was the New York Jets, who lost, but I do still feel better about them headed into last week as opposed to this prior week, where obviously the Davante Adams trade changes a whole lot of things in this as a whole, considering the fact that I do think that their roster as a whole just got better in this past week, which is definitely something that the Jets should be feeling optimistic about internally. Obviously, a loss is a loss, and it's hard to come away with too many moral victories, but last week I had them at an 8, coming off of what was a much uglier loss, in my opinion, to the Vikings in London. At least this past week they showed some optimism of an offense, and there are going to still be steps that need to be taken, and I still don't think that the addition of Davante Adams necessarily fixes everything. That offensive line has not done a good enough job protecting Aaron Rodgers. I am somebody who is a little bit more on the optimistic side about what this O-line can eventually provide. They've had a little bit of instability, specifically at that right tackle spot, where it was Morgan Moses dealing with an injury that he was missed the past couple of weeks. Olu Fashanu was taking over in that time. 3 new offensive linemen to start this year, and I think overall a talented group. So I do feel like the Jets can improve offensively as they move on from here. I think there are holes still on both sides of the roster. This is not a team that I consider to be a true Super Bowl contender, but now it at least feels like the Jets are headed in a more positive direction, and they can make a real play at the playoffs despite a 2-4 start. So I have the Jets a little bit more on the concern side. Last week I had them at an 8. This week they actually improve a little bit. Even despite the loss, I have them at a 7. Next up, the worst loss of the weekend was the Dallas Cowboys, who got absolutely pummeled by the Detroit Lions in the mid-afternoon slate on Sunday. And this was a bloodbath really from the start, which is something that I don't think was entirely unexpected, but still, to the degree that this happened, has to feel terrible from a team standpoint, the organization up top, the fans, all of it. It was a bit of a disaster. And Again, this is not a scenario where I feel like this came out of nowhere, where we knew very clearly, and the reason why we were on the Lions last week, it was because of the fact that there is such a blatant mismatch in the Lions running game against that Cowboys front seven, and it very clearly won out. It's just that the Cowboys weren't able to find any sort of other, realm of optimism in this game either. And the Cowboys, I have them at a 7, similar to the Jets. Now, these two teams, I do feel, I would say, better about the Jets as a team as a whole. But the bright side for the Cowboys is that their division is still very much in reach, where it's the Commanders and the Eagles ahead of them right now. I think that both of those teams are probably better than Dallas is, but I also think that it is pretty possible that I think that every one of those teams has flaws. It's not like there is a clear-cut winner of that division in the NFC East in front of us, and we're going to be talking about the Commanders here in a moment, but I think that the Cowboys, they have a lot of areas that they need to improve. Now, some of those will be aided by getting some players back from injury. Brandon Cooks on offense, some key members of their defense, Micah Parsons, Deron Bland, DeMarcus Lawrence. They can all help make the Cowboys a better team. I don't know if it makes them a playoff team, though. So I am pretty sufficiently concerned about the Cowboys. I have them sitting at a 7. Like I mentioned, Washington Commanders. In the NFC East, I have them at a 3 coming into week 7. And the idea behind this is that, this is a team that it is so hard to be panicked about who they are at this current point in time, because they were maybe by some people seen as a dark horse coming into this season. I wasn't on the Commanders like that headed into this year, so they've been a very fun surprise from an NFL viewership standpoint. And I think that ultimately for the Commanders in all of this, they are in a position where they can, understand that they're kind of playing with house money to some degree. This has been a very successful season already up to this point. And I think that they are still legitimately in contention for being a top 10 team in the NFL. Now, with those sort of new updated expectations for the Commanders, there are definitely holes in this roster, and it is basically up and down that defense, which is where I have the issues. The Ravens were able to just have their way with this Commanders defense, ultimately allowed over 400 total yards. They got dominated in both the passing and running game this past weekend. I do think that their secondary is a genuine concern as a whole. And for their front seven to be ran on like they did, it was 484 yards allowed total, 308 passing, 176 on the ground. So the Commanders, there's no panic for the most part in terms of, what the direction of this team is moving forward. But in terms of this season and being now a playoff contender, I do think that there are issues with the roster. I mentioned the defense, and again, that secondary, which they have to go out, and even if it's a middling cornerback, I saw a mock trade for Jonathan Jones of the Patriots, like even something like that I think would be worthwhile for the Commanders to invest a little bit more into their secondary here. But the other part of it as well is that the offense, I don't think that there really are all that many. I think they're missing a second option is really what I'm getting at here, where Terry McLaurin, obviously, one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, borderline top 10 there. He is continuing to have a very good year. He had 2 touchdowns this past weekend against the Ravens. Zach Ertz has shown a little bit of life these past couple weeks, but, overall, it's a lot more sort of just gadget guys that take turns having big moments. Zacchaeus has had some good games for them as well. We see Ertz and Noah Brown a little bit involved as well. But they are missing that wide receiver too, which has, been clear since preseason, since they traded Jahan Dotson. I would definitely prefer for them to have a second weapon, which eventually when we get into some of these more high leverage games down the stretch of the year, you think about how opposing defenses are going to play Terry McLaurin and trying to remove him. How will Jaden Daniels be able to succeed? We'll see. I still think he will be able to do a good job, but difficult situation there to sort of navigate through as a rookie quarterback. But the Arizona Cardinals, a team that I was very high on coming into this season, and I guess it really is just on me in terms of picking this team to be the dark horse playoff contender, but they have looked very far from that up to this point in the season, where, they have a couple valuable wins against divisional opponents, blowing out the Rams in week 2 and coming back against the 49ers just last week, to the point where the Cardinals are a team that, they're still not out of it entirely, but my concerns with them sort of lie in two of the most important spots, and that is, at least to some degree, Kyler Murray at quarterback and with Jonathan Gannon as the head coach, where it's not like either one of them should be losing their jobs up to this point in the year. Because, again, for the most part, expectations were pretty low for Arizona. I was high on them, but that's just sort of me internally. They knew this was going to be a little bit of, not quite a rebuild, but, definitely at least a retooling. And I think it's been kind of concerning what we've seen from Kyler Murray up to this point. And not to the point where, again, he's been a disaster. Do I love the contract? No, not necessarily, but it's definitely not a top 3, probably not a top 5 worst quarterback contract in the NFL. So, there are flaws there, sure, but it's something that they can put a competent team around him and be competitive. And the Cardinals have shown an ability to be competitive even in a number of these losses. This past weekend against the Packers was not that. They were dominated on both sides of the ball, and I am, again, given my expectations preseason for them that they could be a dark horse playoff team, I'm definitely disappointed there. But the panic level as a whole, I think it probably sits around a 7, which is where I have them at this current point, considering the fact that this season seems like it might be getting away from them. Still early in the year, and it's still very possible for them to work their way back into it. But truthfully, I don't think that there is any chance within reason, barring anything crazy happening, that they overtake the 49ers to win their division. So then they're competing with a number of these teams for the wild card spot. And you look at the NFC, feels like it's dominated by that NFC North division at this point. The Packers, the Lions, the Vikings, the Bears. I think that they get a division winner and at least 2 wild card teams in there. And everybody else is just sort of duking it out for that 7 seed, or at least that 7th spot. Seeding itself is sort of a different conversation there. And it's possible for the Cardinals, but at this point, I'm not very confident in them to be able to pull it off, so I have them at a 7. The Seattle Seahawks, one of their divisional rivals. Seahawks, a little bit in a similar situation, I suppose. They're a step behind in terms of the divisional race. The 49ers did beat them. That's something that the Cardinals do have over the 49ers and over the Seahawks, I suppose, to some degree as well. But the difference is the Seahawks have reinforcements coming. They've been dealing with a number of injuries, especially on the defensive side of the ball, that I do think once they get more of their playmakers, specifically in that front 7, back from injury, that they can sort of start to take this thing back to the next level. Now, the Seahawks, they have some blatant flaws, and specifically it's the offensive line and the lack of production from there. The defense hasn't been very good. You could frankly say they've been bad the past 3 weeks during this losing streak. And the times that they've looked good, they have beaten Bo Nix in his first career start and two quarterbacks that are no longer starting quarterbacks in the NFL just a few weeks later. So that is something to definitely take into consideration with the Seahawks team. I was thinking of having them at a 6. I ultimately bumped them down to a 5 because ultimately when you're talking about panic, I mean, the Seahawks kind of, they've won the games they should have up to this point in the year, and I don't think that any one of these games, I suppose the Giants loss is definitely a bad one, but for the most part, the Seahawks aren't far off of what their preseason expectations are, and they have a chance to be better should they get healthy. So I'm in the middle with them. I have them at a 5. I think it's very possible that they do put together a run for the playoffs, but they're going to need to be better defensively, or be better more so offensively on that line of scrimmage, get Kenneth Walker more involved, and then hope that once they get healthier on defense, they can play like a top 10 group, which a lot of people had them as coming into this season. And then final team here, the Denver Broncos. I think the Broncos are pretty all right, all things considered. They're 3-3 right now. They are definitely in contention for a wild card spot. It's hard to panic right now and at all for the Broncos, considering that they're starting a rookie quarterback right now. Do I think the Bo Nix is the most talented quarterback, especially first-round quarterback that we've seen drafted in recent years? No. But he's shown signs of promise. I thought he was pretty good in that Raiders win week 5. Last week, it was a really slow start for the Broncos that they couldn't overcome, but you saw some flashes from Nix in the second half to make that game a little bit more competitive. And I think that just seeing, signs of improvement from Bo Nix ultimately is where this franchise should be at. Now, pressure's amped up a little bit more because that defense has been so excellent to begin the year that now there are a little bit more expectations with the Broncos. And under Sean Payton, you do kind of think that you have a shot at being competitive anytime you have a Hall of Fame caliber coach on your sideline for you. So, as of right now, still a very early season. I think that this offense could continue to come a long way. I have them at a 4 right now. I am less worried about them than I am worried. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section, as we are going to be taking a quick break. And when we come back on the other side, I want to talk about the Green Bay Packers a little bit more closely and talking about where they currently stand in the NFL after a dominant win over the Arizona Cardinals. So we're going to be diving into that. But before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement. The top is so vacant. I don't need shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place. All this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it. The news if it's some losing shit. It's stupid me. They choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, and we are going to be doing a little bit of a deeper dive into the Green Bay Packers, as this past weekend they dominated the Arizona Cardinals for a big win. Ultimately, just double checking the score here, it was 34-13. And the Packers are a team that I was very high on coming into this season, and ultimately, the Jordan Love injury early on in week 1 did derail things for a bit. Not that they actually ended up losing either of the starts for Malik Willis. They did end up losing in Love's first game back against the Vikings, where it was pretty clear that he was, rusty, that he didn't look great, turned the ball over 3 times, was making some reckless throws. But even in what was had a lot of bad in it against the Vikings, they were at least close to it, losing that game 31-29. You think about it as well, a couple missed field goals in that game as well. People are saying that the Vikings dominated the Packers. I don't think that's quite what happened. They definitely handed it to the Packers in the first half, that's obviously always going to be very hard to overcome. That being said, though, Packers were more in that game than I think people are really giving them credit for, and it's more than just garbage time touchdowns that kept them close. I thought that it was a really gutsy performance, and since then, we've seen still some moments of not great Jordan Love. The pick 6 that he had in that Rams game was definitely an ugly one, but overall, I think the Packers are kind of firing on both sides of the ball now. Now, obviously, defense in that Vikings game, also not great, against one of the better offenses that we've seen in the NFL up to this point in the season. But, you're starting to see some of these other players step up for them. Evan Williams is a name to know. Rookie safety for them. It was taken, I believe, in the 4th round. For whatever it's worth with Pro Football Focus grades, I understand that, they only sort of sometimes are extremely reliable, but usually something to note. And Evan Williams was tied for the highest rated safety in the NFL this past weekend. He played a pretty good job as a whole. There were 2 standout plays in particular to me. It was tackling Kyler behind the line of scrimmage, reading a zone read perfectly, and then it was forcing a fumble downfield as well. So, you have some players stepping up for you maybe on that back end where there's a little bit less security, I think. You look on the front 7 as well. I mean, Edgerrin Cooper, who was the number 1 linebacker drafted in 2024, he also had a pretty good game this past weekend against the Cardinals. And their ability to, for the most part, I think, neutralize, and there was a lot of self-inflicted wounds, absolutely, for the Cardinals this past week as well, and it's not like the Cardinals are the ultimate litmus test anyways, but that is a very good rushing attack for Arizona, and I thought the Packers did a really good job neutralizing it. They have the guys on that front line, the Rashawn Garys of the world, to be able to put the pressure on opposing offensive lines. Kenny Clark is another one. They have a very good front 7, and Jair Alexander, he's sort of been in and out of the lineup this season so far with injuries, which does seem to be a bit of a common theme for him. He is one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL when he is playing. Add to that as well Xavier McKinney, who did go without an interception in this game. So the streak to start the year of 5 in a row has come to an end. But, you just look around. I think that they are so talented on both sides of the ball at this point. And it sort of had me thinking as well, based off of, a little bit what happened this past weekend. Super, super unfortunate what happened to Aiden Hutchinson. You have to feel terrible. Hutchinson was, I don't know if he officially was, but through the first few weeks of the season, I was saying that he was on track to win his first ever Defensive Player of the Year. Now that Hutchinson is gone, I do think that has a very real impact on that Detroit defense, where already that is a little bit of the weaker point for them. They have this whole reworked secondary, which has had ups and downs up to this point for Detroit. And now you lose the guy who is putting pressure on opposing quarterbacks almost instantaneously on a regular basis. I think that is a very serious loss and could have some very real impacts on how the Lions are viewed moving forward this season. We still don't have an exact timeline. Seems like he's going to be out for the year. I guess we'll see. Would be great to see him return. But I think that the Packers are the best team in the NFC North right now. Now, I know the Vikings, undefeated, they're the darlings of the NFL right now. And it feels like if you do anything but praise the Vikings right now, you are hating on them. That's very much not the case. The Vikings have been in my top 5, top 3 of power rankings since we started doing them on a weekly basis early on in the season. Vikings are an excellent team as well. That being said, though, there is something to me that I think that the Vikings have shown moments of vulnerability. You look at the last 2 weeks where late in these games, in the second half against the Packers and against the Jets, they let opposing teams sort of creep up on them in those second halves. Some Sam Darnold turnovers have also played into that as well. And I'm not saying it's clear cut that the Packers are the number one, but that's kind of where I'm leaning into here. Really, the only area at this point, and it's not to say that the Packers are a flawless team. Every team has their bumps, but I mean, overall, my number one concern with Green Bay right now is their kicking situation, which they maybe found a solution to. They ended up cutting Braden, I'm blanking on his last name. I guess I'm just checking it now, so I got it right. Naverson. He was a rookie. They cut him this past weekend as he's been struggling to begin the season. They bring in Brandon McManus. If you remember back to the divisional round game against the 49ers in the 2023 playoffs, could have been a very different game had Anders Carlson knocked down a couple of those late field goals as well. So, I mean, I think the Packers are very, very good at this point. Now, all of this leading to, are the Packers becoming the team to beat in the NFC? Is that too bold of a statement to make ahead of Week 7? And I don't think it's far off, because really when you look at the top contenders in the NFC at this point, I think it is really those top 3 in the NFC North. It's the Vikings, the Lions, and the Packers. No disrespect to the Bears. I picked the Bears as a playoff team this year, and I do think that that is still a possibility, but the Bears are yet to really prove it on a big stage yet. They don't really have an excellent win up to this point. I don't want to dive too much into the Bears right now, but I mean, they're in it. They're not the class of the NFC right now. I think even the strongest Bears believer would tell you that. You look at the NFC South, I don't know what to really make of any one of those teams. The Falcons and the Buccaneers are the 2 teams sitting at 4-2 right now. Both of them are good, have talent on both sides of the ball, but I mean, I think that the Packers clear both of them. You look at the NFC East, right now it's the Washington Commanders, another one of these teams. They deserve so much praise for what they've been able to put out up to this point in the season. That being said, I do have real issues with that defense. And eventually, I mean, Jaden Daniels, maybe he never does look like a rookie. And, you know, he is somebody that came into the NFL with some more experience behind him. And maybe that's going to help propel him into, you know, just never really having that rookie moment. But I still don't think that the Commanders are a better team than the Packers. So, you know, that's out of 3 divisions, I'm taking the Packers, which brings me to the San Francisco 49ers. And I guess you could throw the Eagles and the Cowboys in the conversation with the East. I mean, neither one of those teams look great up to this point in the year. I think that the Eagles do have a lot of talent. I mean, and the Eagles did beat the Packers, I suppose, as well, is another argument you could make there. But there feels like there is a lot of dysfunction behind the scenes right now in Philadelphia, and it's not like the Packers haven't been without any drama. Obviously, the Romeo Doubs situation was the most pressing one, where he wasn't happy about his role. The team suspended him for that Rams game, and all of it seems to be fine now. Doubs scores 2 touchdowns in this game against the Cardinals. After the first one, I don't know if it means anything. I don't want to overly look into things. First thing Doubs does is put his arms around 2 of his nearest teammates and celebrates with them. So, I don't know. I think the Packers are only picking up steam here. It's about them and the 49ers right now, in my opinion. And it's tough to say in terms of being the team to beat, because usually that accounts for having some sort of, stability and stature to stand on. The 49ers have been to the Super Bowl twice in the past 4 seasons, I believe it is. And twice in the past 4 seasons. They've been to numerous NFC Championship games with Mike Shanahan that I don't know if I can go quite as far as fully saying the Packers are the team to beat, because they still do have to sort of overcome the 49ers in their stature. And the Niners, I do think, are still legit. They've been dealing with a ton of injuries up to this point in the year, and that has led to a slower start than they definitely would have preferred. But I think you see a stepped up version of Brock Purdy this season. I've been really impressed with what I've seen from him. You have the weapons in Deebo Samuel and George Kittle, and Brandon Ayuk really hasn't done all that much for them this year, but he's at least still, an option. Jawan Jennings is having an excellent year, and this is 3-3, all without Christian McCaffrey as well. And you look at these losses, been kind of weird ones, where they lost to the Vikings, who, as we just talked about, have been one of the best teams in the NFL up to this point, and then really fell apart in two of the games against the Rams and the Cardinals. But I mean, I'm still not worried about them, and maybe that's ignorant of me. If you are worried about the 49ers, be sure to let us know why in the comment section. But I think that they easily, I don't know about easily, they win that Cardinals game if they have a kicker, in my opinion. Jake Moody going down in that game. And for the Rams game, I mean, hard to make sense of that one. It's just a matter of, I think that once they get Christian McCaffrey back, they will be able to close out some of these games to a better extent than what they've done. Mason's done a great job for them up to this point in the season, but once McCaffrey gets back, assuming that he does, I think it's off and running for these 49ers. So to answer my question, no, I do not think that the Packers are currently the team to beat in the NFC, but I do think that that's still the 49ers. I think the Packers are the first one knocking at that opportunity. But again, there are a number of other talented teams in the NFC right now. So, if you think that there's somebody that I'm overseeing, definitely let us know why in the comment section. But we'll be doing our power rankings officially tomorrow afternoon. So you'll have to stick with us to see the full results there. But we're now going to be switching gears a little bit. We're going to be diving into the NBA. We're less than a week away at this point until NBA tips off. So we are going to start with a story about these season openers, and unfortunately it is not a positive one, as Clippers superstar Kawhi Leonard is expected to miss LA's season opener. We'll talk about the details behind this and overall where the Clippers are at this point, because I do think that they are in the craziest game right now of limbo, of not knowing quite where they're at. So we're going to be diving into that. But before we do so, we do have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be switching gears to the NBA. And I want to start off with the recent reports that Kawhi Leonard is expected to miss the season opener for the Los Angeles Clippers, as Leonard just, it's so unfortunate the way that his career has sort of unfolded in terms of these injuries and his public perception as a result of it. I mean, I listen, I don't want to blame a player for being injured. That is so disingenuous, and as somebody who is not a professional athlete, it would be irresponsible of me. But it has gotten to just a ridiculous point here. And again, I have a lot of sympathy, and I don't think that it is his fault. There's inflammation that he's dealing with in that right knee, the knee that he had previously torn his Achilles and ACL. So it's a very real issue. But I mean, the storylines are just writing themselves about Kawhi's career over these past few seasons, where he has just been unable to stay healthy. Now, this is all as a result of some of the things that Tyronn Lue spoke about to the media. Both CBS Sports and ESPN have been reporting on this, and it sounds like Lue has a starting lineup ready to go for the season opener on October 23rd against the Suns that does not include Kawhi Leonard in the scenario that he isn't able to play. And even if he does play, which again, not expected to, but that kind of leads me to think maybe he would be coming off of the bench and they do a little bit of, load management to some degree early on in the season with him. We'll see. The lineup that CBS Sports at least reported on was that it would be James Harden, Norman Powell, Terrence Mann, Derek Jones Jr., and Ivica Zubac, which is a situation. I mean, it's a fine roster, I suppose, but this is where I don't really understand what the Clippers are really searching for at this point. I understand the Clippers didn't want to overly invest into a team that was a little bit on the older side, a little bit more on the injury-prone side in terms of Harden, Paul George, and Kawhi, and to, unquestionably hitch your wagon to that. I think, be maybe a little bit irresponsible, but also the Clippers are at a point here where they are just bought in. I'll have to do a little bit more research on what draft picks the Clippers have from here on out, but I don't think it's a lot. I think they have probably mortgaged a very significant load of future picks, and yes, they have. As we pull it up here, they have owned 2 first-round picks in the coming years, in 2030 and 2031. All of their other first-round picks have been traded along the way. The Paul George deal. I don't think that they actually gave up a first-rounder for James Harden. I could be mistaken on that. But, I mean, they have just mortgaged their entire future into this current core that was Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. And at some point, you are just doing a little bit of a disservice to yourself if you're going to continue to invest into a core in Paul George and Kawhi. That has yet to work. But also, now they're sitting here with Kawhi Leonard still on the books, giving him big-time money. You pay James Harden this offseason a bunch of money. I believe, I can double-check here. I should have been a little bit more prepared in terms of the specific financials of all of this as well, considering the fact that Harden, he signs a $70 million deal over the course of 2 years, which is kind of a lose-lose in my books. He has a player option next year, so he's costing them over $30 million this year, which is not a desirable contract if they ever wanted to make a trade of sorts. And then next year he has a player option for $36 million. So, I mean, maybe if he does have a stellar season, you're just going to have to go out and pay him more anyways. And it just feels like they're directionless at this point. And you look about, what types of young players could they be building around from here on out? I don't really have an answer for you. I mean, Bones Highland is good for, some highlights every here and there, and he can be an entertaining scorer, but I don't think that he's a franchise centerpiece. There are a lot of people that seem to love Cam Christie, who the team drafted in this past year's draft. Truthfully, I can't say I'm super familiar with Cam Christie, but, either way, you're talking about a second-round pick that maybe he could be a good player for you. Maybe he could be somebody that could stick around for a long time from here, but there's nothing to build around really at this current point with the Clippers. And I just don't understand why, if you're going to let Paul George walk, you are going to continue to pretend that you are for real. And that's kind of what it is at this point, is just pretending. I mean, the Clippers internally feel like, you have Kawhi making comments about how they feel like they are still championship contenders. I just really don't see that being the case, especially in the Western Conference, where there are so many teams that are better than them in the now and in the future. Where the Clippers, I get that there is this underlying idea of they just moved into a new arena. They're in LA. They're trying to sort of win over fans from, Lakers lore on the other side of town. But, I mean, I don't know if a 35-year-old James Harden is able to do that, and a building block in Kawhi Leonard, who is hardly available. And I don't know. I guess we'll circle this back around to Kawhi, because the reality of the situation is Kawhi, when we did see him actually healthy years ago now at this point, but when you talk about early on in the bubble and those playoffs, and it was those 2 years against the Mavericks, I mean, Kawhi was doing unreal things in terms of a two-way performance to be able to be exceptional for them. It was the 2020 playoffs and the 2021 playoffs. But again, he ends up getting hurt in the bubble as well. And we haven't even really seen him available for the Clippers in the postseason. And it's been so disappointing seeing the way that his career, I definitely wouldn't say spiraled. I mean, he's still, relevant. He's still on a good, not great team. He's been to the postseason in, I believe, every season that he's been with the Clippers, and he's had high moments, and he's getting paid. So again, it's not like it's spiraling in terms of, his life is falling out of control. He's living a very good life right now. And he's still a very good basketball player that is capable of a lot. It's just a matter of what we're actually getting on the court just has not been to the caliber of what we were expecting for years to come, especially coming off of that special run that he had with Toronto in 2019. And you can argue about, whether or not the Raptors would have won if the Warriors weren't injured. I would probably not even argue you. I would say that, yes, you are right. The Raptors would not have won that finals if it weren't for the injuries to Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson. I feel pretty comfortable saying that. Doesn't mean that Kawhi wasn't still stellar that entire season long, including the postseason run. And I think I'm just disappointed as a fan more than anything, because Kawhi has been, especially in his prime, was one of the most fun players to watch in the NBA based off of that two-way dominance. Where, again, I go back to those series against Luka in 20 and 21, where he was a bucket on offense, and then on the other side, he's guarding Luka, giving him everything he can, having special moments along the way. And it's just been so disappointing to see the way that this is all sort of played out. And now for the Clippers, I think it is such a dull, unencouraging situation for the Clippers moving forward here, where, like we mentioned, no draft capital until 2030. That's the thing, is I mentioned first round picks. They have 0 picks, period, of their own until 2030. And at that point, I mean, I kind of have to imagine that Kawhi Leonard will be long gone, James Harden will be long gone, and what are the Clippers actually going to have on their roster in terms of, playing competitive basketball? They have Ty Lue at least on the sideline, which is a plus for them. It is one of those things, though, where as much as I do think that coaching is very much downplayed in the NBA and people don't fully appreciate the skill and knowledge that it requires to be an NBA head coach, it can only get you so far. And the other part of this as well is just the fact that, it's not like I don't think they're going to have any of these players, play really well and the Clippers can sell off big in some blockbuster deal and get a massive return. I would have to imagine the market on Kawhi Leonard is very timid. Same with James Harden. And outside of that, I mean, you don't have even really a B-list player on your roster. I like Norman Powell. Like, there are championship competitive teams that, Norman Powell honestly might be worth a late first round pick. Zubats as well is, a pretty good player, but I don't know. And maybe I'm disrespecting Terrence Mann as well now that I'm thinking this out loud as well in terms of not really a building block. I mean, the issue is Terrence Mann is 27 at this point. So, like, I do really like his game, and he's been the younger player on this Clippers team that's been able to step up for them. He's not a young player, though, at this point either. So, I don't know. I'm so discouraged by how all of this played out for the Clippers, and I really do think that the Clippers made a mistake by letting Paul George walk in free agency for nothing. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section, as we are going to be headed into our final segment of the day, where we are going to be now with, just days left until the NBA tips off. We are going to be going position by position and listing the top 10 players by position for the upcoming season. Today we have point guards, so I will be listing my top 10 point guards for the year. So we're going to be diving into that, but first we're going to be taking our final break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where as we are counting down the final days towards the NBA tip-off, which takes place next Tuesday, October 22nd, we have 5 shows, and each one we are going to be giving out top 10 players by position. We're going to be starting today at point guard, just, for clarity's sake here. The way that I decided to go about this, not the best system, but just out of simplicity, I am choosing the positions based off of what ESPN has them listed as. So, you can argue whether or not, for example, Luka is a point guard or a shooting guard. He's listed as a point guard on ESPN.com, so that is what we're rolling with here. Don't usually love doing lists like this. I feel like they are very divisive, but at the same time, it's in the name of the love of the game. All of these players are obviously excellent if they are in the top 10. So without further ado, let's just get into it and try not to be too upset. This is my list, not your list. Let me know what your top 10 would be in the comments section. Number 10, I have Tyrese Maxey. Maxey is a player that I have been so high on since his days at Kentucky. As a Celtics fan myself, I was very disappointed when he ended up in Philadelphia because I knew he was going to be a hit, and that he has. That being said, I think that a lot of people have it's not even overrating Tyrese Maxey because, again, he's excellent, but we are really still yet to see him do anything on his own. He is an unbelievable complementary player to Joel Embiid and provides a certain skill set in offense that Embiid has not had throughout his entire career. Again, Maxey's great, but when you look at, and this shouldn't all fall on him, but the 76ers really struggled once Embiid went out with the injury. No duh, but it's not like Maxey was great enough to, lift them to a 500 record. And then in the playoffs as well, the non-Embiid minutes with Maxey on still were not positives. And that says a lot about the 76ers roster construction. Again, I'm not trying to hold Tyrese Maxey to the standard of he can put a franchise at this moment. Tyrese Maxey is how old? 22, 23 years old. I just don't think he's at the point right now where he can backpack a team to the playoffs or in a playoff series. He's a little bit more complimentary at this point, which I don't think is an insult to him. I think it's that he's 23 years old, has spent basically his entire professional career right now playing with Joel Embiid. He's not asked to do more. I think 10 is very fair for him. He's an all-star caliber with an upside of an all-NBA type player. But some of the guys in front of their list, I think, has shown it the possibility of being able to carry their team more, and I think that they will this upcoming season. That being said, number 9 here, Damian Lillard, a player that for the longest time had the Portland Trailblazers franchise on his back. Last year, gets traded to Milwaukee right before the season, and it was disappointing, absolutely. And, I think that even him being down here at 9 is maybe a little bit disrespectful based off of what I feel about him and his entire career and what he is capable of. But at this point, I have a hard time putting him much higher than this. I think that he is going to have a much better second season with Milwaukee than year one. There was so much turnover, and Lillard himself, basically through Doc Rivers, said that last year he came into the season in the worst shape of his life. That should be better this upcoming season, and I think that Lillard is going to be, in one of the higher end point guards in the league, but it's hard for me to fully buy back in at this point, knowing that he is a little bit of a liability on the defensive side of the ball. He has been or at least he was very streaky last season. He definitely has it in him, and ultimately, if he shoots up this list by the end of the year, I won't be surprised whatsoever. But as of right now, I have Lillard at 9. Number 8, I have Trae Young. Another super volatile, polarizing player with NBA fans. I don't love Trae Young in terms of being a well-rounded player. I don't love his play style where it is so ball dominant that I think it can really restrict the offense that he runs. But Trae Young will also show likely this season that with the ball in his hands and with players that can sort of more so play into his system, he will elevate the Hawks to a play-in caliber team. And last year, he has the hand injury that keeps him out for a significant amount of time. Very interesting subplot at that time of DeJounte Murray. Are the Hawks somehow better with him? Ultimately, the answer was kind of no. DeJounte himself was better without Trae Young. It just clearly was not a fit that worked. Trae Young, again, is it my favorite skill set? Definitely not. But the scoring ability, the passing ability, and him being able to be the epicenter of an offense undoubtedly is something that is going to make the Hawks at least a competitive team this season where there isn't a ton of talent. I wouldn't say top to bottom. There are some players in that roster that I do like. We're going to be doing a little bit more team breakdowns as the weeks proceed here, but I think that Trae Young, I have him coming at number 8 right now, and this is a guy that has made All-NBAs before, has been a perennial All-Star. So, again, feels a little bit low. The NBA is deep in guard talent right now. Number 7, I have De'Aaron Fox, and Fox is somebody that I don't think he gets enough love from a national perspective, and I understand it's this idea of, well, what has he really done in terms of team success? I understand that. You also have to understand that it is the Sacramento Kings that he played as on, which has been a perennially bad franchise for the majority of the past couple decades. And Fox, it's the two-way ability with him. I mean, this is swipe of the Fox. This is, he does not get enough credit for being a very good player on the defensive end as well. He has that game-breaking speed, the transition game. And I think that honestly, this upcoming season, I feel like this could be a big year for the Kings, running transition more. Him, Sabonis. I really like the way that Keegan Murray is sort of developed within this offense. I'd like to see them running the court more. I think it's going to showcase De'Aaron Fox's skills. So I understand there are maybe a little bit more hesitations with him in the half court. So if you put him lower on the list, I would understand. Again, we're talking about multiple players here who have made all-star teams, all-NBA teams. It's tough to sort of sift through them, but I'm a big fan of De'Aaron Fox. I have him at number 7. Number 6, I have Tyrese Haliburton. I feel bad for Haliburton because of how the public perception has gotten so out of hand with him. He has been... If you're going to say anything about Haliburton, I mean, I understand there are deficiencies, specifically on the defensive side of the floor, that are a real issue. But in terms of just having a player to set the tone for your entire offense, I think Haliburton really does have an excellent balance of the scoring to playmaking. And Again, he has become unpopular with a lot of NBA fans for some reason. Again, defense, I totally hear you. He's not exactly a take over the game offensively for a lot of moments, but I think that part of it is in his game. What he does overall, I think, is extremely valuable to the way that the Pacers play games. He is the reason why their offense executes and is the best offense in the league from an efficiency standpoint, or, at least in that upper echelon. That I think Haliburton, again, at this point has sort of, because the rise was so fast for him and the Pacers were getting so much love during that in-season tournament, that once it got to the playoffs and Haliburton, who I still don't think was 100% healthy, he's not taking over games from a scoring perspective. I think people sort of fell off of the scent with him. I think Haliburton is still very, very good. So I have him coming in at number 6. Number 5, I have Ja Morant. Morant's another one where it's really hard to place him because we know what he's capable of. This is a guy that was All-NBA second team just a couple seasons ago before obviously everything sort of erupted with a combination of injuries and suspensions and such. But Ja Morant is still one of those guys, and he is just a total wrecking crew for the NBA when you talk about his driving, his dunking, all of those things. But I do think that there is upside as well for him, elsewhere. I think that he has another level of playmaking that he can go to. I mean, I don't think he's been particularly a star passer these past couple seasons, and he's still averaged 8.1 assists per game in each of the past 2 years. I think he is going to now, fully healthy, head clear, ramp up into the season, and the Grizzlies are going to be in that playoff conversation, and it's going to be because of Ja Morant in the middle. So I have him coming in at number 5. Number 4, I have Steph Curry. Feels wrong to have him this low on a list, just based off of him being Steph Curry and him showing this past summer what he is still capable of. But in terms of which players I would want on my... It's so tough even saying it still. In terms of which players I have the most confidence in that are poised for an excellent season leading them to the playoffs, and, him and number 3, I'm so, tied up between. I think that Steph Curry is still capable of doing just about anything on a basketball court and taking over games at the biggest moments possible. But that being said, I don't think it's a play style enough to, fully overcome adversity like I do think that Jalen Brunson is capable of. Where Brunson, there were so many games where I understand the Knicks were more talented than the Warriors last season, but Jalen Brunson was a one-man wrecking crew in a lot of these moments where there were injuries galore. And it's so hard to discredit what he was able to do last season. Top 5 in MVP voting, second team All-NBA, as Steph was third. It's not at all a statement on Steph Curry. At this point, Curry is now 36 years old. He should be declining, and I don't even think that it is that he's fully declining. I think it's just that the next generation has sort of taken over a little bit more. So I'm very tossed up between 3 and 4. Let me know in the comment section whether or not you agree. Number 2, I have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Just the two-way ability, the fact that he is able to get to his spots, knock down shots like it's nobody's business, and then on the other side, be this lengthy defender that is able to have a real impact. The passing as well with Shai. He is just such a smart basketball player, and I'm a huge fan of his. The way that he has been able to really become the leader. He is in his, late 20s, so it's not like he's this young player necessarily, but he is still yet to hit his prime, and he's become the true through and through leader for this Thunder team that just won almost 60 games last year, is probably poised to be in a similar conversation this upcoming year as well. I have Shai at number 2 because Luka had to be number 1, and Luka, just what he is able to do in terms of transforming a team's identity. I understand it's very high usage, sort of Harden-esque in that sense, but he is somebody who, we saw him through the injuries and everything lead the Mavericks to the finals. Everybody makes it up like Kyrie Irving was this huge. Kyrie Irving had a good season as well. He's not the reason why they made the finals. Like, Kyrie had some moments. There were also, more games than not that he was kind of radio silence. It was the Luka show, and for good reason. It should be. He is one of the best players in the NBA. He's at least in that conversation for the number 1 player in the NBA as a whole. He is the entire identity of their offense for the most part. When he succeeds, that's when you see Gafford and Lively and Washington all being able to build off of him. Players that are talented, but needed that extra little bit of push to fully showcase how good they are. And that is Luka and what he's able to bring in terms of the playmaking with him as well. I think that Luka is the best passer in the NBA. He's maybe the best scorer in the NBA. He's easily the number 1 point guard in the league, in my opinion. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. We will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care. Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like
Hello everyone and welcome back in yet again to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. Happy Wednesday to you all. Should be a good show ahead for you guys. It's going to be a Thursday night football heavy show, previewing tomorrow night's game between the Broncos and the Saints, giving you all things betting advice, especially in terms of prop bets. Gonna be a weird one. Not exactly the most exciting. Definitely a very mysterious game. But then, after all of that, I'm going to continue and conclude with my positional rankings, my tight ends, and my defenses. And last but not least, we're going to talk a little bit about the world of college football. The ever-hectic world of college football at that. I'm going to talk about some of the week's biggest games in terms of a betting perspective. But without further ado, before we begin, I do want to remind you that if you want to see more content such as this or other short content we might have on the channel, like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network as a whole. Great way to interact with different shows throughout the network. But if you want to interact with my show directly or other shows as well, make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. They're a great way to interact with the show more deeply. You can either press the $, leave a tip or donation, or you can just leave a comment question, concern, anything throughout the show. Just makes the show that much better. I really appreciate hearing all of your lovely opinions. Without further ado, let us jump right into today's show. Starting off, like I said, with tomorrow night's game. Should be a very weird one, like I said, between the Broncos and the Saints. Very mysterious kind of matchup between rookie QBs. Of course, we have Bo Nix, who has proven to be very erratic in his short tenure as the Broncos quarterback. And then Spencer Rattler, forced into the starting role for the New Orleans Saints after Derek Carr goes down with injuries. And having a very solid, if not, humdrum performance against the Bucs in a game that he wasn't expected to win. Now they meet, and I don't know how I feel about this game, whether or not it's going to be as explosive as I think, whether or not either of these offenses is going to put up consistent points, but all I know is that I'm going to be hyper-focused on how both of these QBs play. But without further ado, I'm going to give you my betting advice in this game. New Orleans is a 1.5-point favorite in this game. I don't know whether or not the line did or did not move just yet. The over-under is 37.5. The money line's Denver at -105, New Orleans at -115. But I think my biggest problem with this game is that if you're not comfortable with either of these quarterbacks in terms of point production, I don't know whether that makes it easy for you to bet on this game or not, because I feel this is going to be much more of a gauging process for both of these quarterbacks. I feel like I don't necessarily view this game as one where I'm really looking to win money off it. You know what I mean? I'm looking to see improvement from both of these guys. So that's why I'm not as hyper-focused on the betting odds for this game. But I still think that there will be moments where you see improvement from both of these guys that you may not expect. Because, let's face it, both of these teams are in weird situations right now. The Broncos playing much better, perhaps, than people thought coming into the season. A lot of people may have expected them to be dark horse candidates, but not to this degree. I certainly did not think that the defense would have played as well as it has up to this point, but that has been its saving grace. Whereas the offense has been a mix of incompetence from Bo Nix and the potential explosive play that makes you think that Bo Nix could be heading in the right direction. There's no in between, really. There's been no sign of Bo Nix either being a game-managing quarterback, much like, Sean Payton quarterbacks or want to become, or, the explosiveness needed to really make me think that the Broncos can put up points in a hurry on different teams. Whereas on the Saints side of things, for the first 2 weeks of the offense, they were historically good. And they were doing a lot of interesting things. Kamara was playing well. Olave was a bit of a bright spark. Rashid Shaheed, big deep threat. And now Derek Carr's injured. Olave might be out for this game. And Rashid Shaheed's lost his deep threat. And they haven't been running the football with Kamara as consistently as before. So the Saints right now are in a very weird spot. But the favorites, they remain in this game. And that's probably the most interesting aspect of this entire game from a betting perspective. The Saints feel like they're holding on to this favorites title in this game by a thread, because I feel like the Broncos right now have more of a game plan to win games like this than the Saints do. Because the Saints, what they did to start the season was impressive, but I feel like it's papered over a lot of the cracks that they had in their team, because right now the receiving core looks thin for poor Spencer Rattler, and their defense just gave up 51 points to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I feel like the Saints are more in free fall mode, whereas the Broncos are starting to find ways to win in games that they feel are manageable in their current situation. And so that's why I feel like if you want to bet, yes, shy away from this game, but also consider the fact that if you are betting, don't necessarily follow the money line or the favorite, because I feel like the Broncos right now hold all the leverage in this game. They seem to be, funnily enough, the more complete team right now, and they're walking into this game with house money because they're sitting in a very advantageous position for where people thought they were. At 3-3, you have an opportunity to make the AFC playoff race a little bit more contentious than people think. And you're right in the thick of it. You're not on the outside looking in just yet, like a lot of other teams who might just be better than you are. Like, for example, I feel like the Bengals would love to be where the Broncos are right now, even though a lot of people thought they would be 4-2 or 5-1 by now, probably. So the Broncos are in a very advantageous position right now. They hold all the house money in this game. And just looking at the matchup, I feel a little bit more confident that the Broncos can lean into their game plan offensively, in that Bo Nix can be a gunslinger, have those wow moments, and still rely upon their defense to get the job done. Whereas the Saints can't have so many opportunities to score the football if they don't really know how to move it, because Spencer Rattler, not for nothing, looked competent in that game, but he could have looked even better had Chris Olave played the full game, had Alvin Kamara been a factor, and if, he wasn't throwing to a makeshift group. So I feel like, as weird as it is to say right now, the Broncos are in the better spot. But it is a home game for New Orleans. I feel like Spencer Rattler now is getting up to speed on how the NFL plays. So he'll have a set game plan of things that he's comfortable with doing, but I don't think it will be enough. Because the reality of the situation is, I think the Denver Broncos are playing like a top 10 defense right now. I think that Vance Joseph has done a fantastic job of turning this unit around from where it even was last year to now, because this is going to be what drives the Denver Broncos. I feel like if this defense is scrappy enough, can pull out victories for this team in manageable games, then of course I think the Broncos might have a say in the AFC playoff picture, as weird as it is to say at this moment. But what I'm looking for in this game really doesn't come down to who wins, because I feel like I have a clear picture of the Broncos winning this game in my mind, and I feel like it will happen. I just want to see both these offenses improve, because the defenses for both of these teams have the least questions, although the Saints are getting a little bit iffy on that side of the football. I feel like what I want to see out of this game is at least one or two drives I can take away from both of these guys that says to me, for Bo Nix, that the Broncos made the right decision in drafting him and trying to develop him, and for Spencer Rattler to potentially say, hey, the Saints have something here. Why not build around Spencer Rattler for the future if, Derek Carr becomes a little bit more injury prone in the latter stages of his career, so that we know that Spencer Rattler can be relied upon. And so that's what I want to see. This game is more than a win or a loss for both of these teams. It's about the potentials of their futures. And so I'm not holding that much weight from a betting perspective, but I still respect both of these teams very highly for what they could look like in the future. As Andre entered the chat, welcome, my brother. How are you today? I think that you ask a very interesting question here for your fantasy team. Should I drop Charbonnet for Javonte Williams? I only have Charbonnet for the K9 handcuff. I feel like, I wouldn't be mad at this because while both of them haven't been up to snuff in their respective offenses, Charbonnet just does not look like he's going to get that many opportunities for Seattle because their run game is just appallingly bad at this point. And I don't think that they're going to find a way to get either of these backs, as hard as it is for me to say, because I do feel like Kenneth Walker is a huge talent and Zach Charbonnet can contribute here and there. But at the end of the day, it's not looking like the Seattle run game is going to be a huge factor or a huge difference in how they approach their offensive setup. Whereas for the Broncos, I kind of feel like they need Javonte Williams as a piece in this offense a little bit more, because I like all of their weapons, right? Because honestly, unless there's a canine injury, right? I agree as well. Because when I look at it, Javonte Williams just spells like someone who is ready for his breakout moment this season. I feel like tomorrow night could be a huge opportunity for him, should the whole Broncos offensive operation go awry, but also in the future as well, because if you are relying on Kenneth Walker and someone else in your running back room, chances are you're placing too much weight on the other guy in your running back room. Whereas if you experiment with your backups and bring in a guy like Javonte Williams, I feel like he's someone who in the future I can see having a pretty big game. So ultimately, I think at least for this week, it's worth trying to see if Javonte Williams can give you some good fantasy production, because it's a matchup where he could have a big moment. But that's just my opinion. Continue to let me know what you think in the comments about this game and how you're approaching it, both betting and fantasy-wise. But we're about to take a short break, and we come back on the other side. I'm going to give you a little bit of prop bets advice, because I think there's some interesting players in this game that can get you valuable money. We'll be right back to talk about that after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Before we get into our second segment of the day here on today's show, I do want to remind you that if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving a tip or donation through the $ on your screen if you click it there. But also keep on making yourselves available to all the features that you guys offer, including the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features. Great way to interact with the show. I love hearing your guys' opinions. Let me know what you think about the show. Any burning questions, comments, or concerns are always greatly appreciated so we can make our shows that much better. But without further ado, let's jump into our second segment of the day, following in the lines of that Thursday night betting preview. Going to give you some more general prop bets, because while it's a very weird game in terms of a betting perspective, there are a lot of interesting players in it that I feel like have unique opportunities to win you some valuable money. Because at the end of the day, in any other situation, I would say this game is not looking like a fun one to bet on, because we both know these are rookie QBs we're talking about here, and we don't know how their weapons are going to perform for them. But it just makes it that much more exciting to take risks as well. So I feel like this segment is going to be much better to you than, say, a general betting preview. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Let's start off with the Broncos QB, Bo Nix. Now, I feel like there could be many different directions with how I viewed him from a betting perspective in this game, but I think the safest, most risky bet, kind of fun to think about, is going over in yards, 185.5 yards, minus 114. But he's kind of like the reckless QB who you always want to take a risk on because he has high highs and low lows. So I kind of feel like he's going to have one of those games where his recklessness down the field is going to be enough to hit his yardage total, but also he's going to have moments where he actually makes the safer reads. You know what I mean? And he's going to allow his receivers to perform after the catch, and he's going to incorporate so many more weapons. There will be those moments, but just because of how he has performed so far under Sean Payton and perhaps how Sean Payton wants to perform, we're going to see a lot more of Bo Nix trying to get the ball down the field in a hurry rather than, some more drives where he looks like a competent NFL quarterback. But it plays into this prop a lot because you're going to see a lot of things potentially go right for him in the downfield passing game if he continues with this narrative. So look for him to be a fun player to kind of hedge your bets on for tomorrow night's game. But on the other side of things, I found an even weirder bet for his opponent at the QB position for the Saints in Spencer Rattler, because we know from him in college that he was someone who, was kind of a dual threat guy, but mainly ran to throw, rather. And I feel like in tomorrow night's game, we're going to see a lot more of the latter. So I'm going to take the under in terms of his rushing yards. This is a weird one because I wouldn't expect Spencer Rattler, especially in this situation, to run the ball anyways, and you wouldn't expect it probably either. But I feel like it is something in his game that might be a fallback option should the Saints not settle in comfortably in this game. But I am going to take the under anyways at minus 110 because I feel like the way the Saints will approach this game, they're going to want to make Spencer Rattler comfortable. And where Spencer Rattler is more comfortable is picking you apart in the short to intermediate areas of the field. That's where he's at his best, showing off his accuracy to different levels, and most importantly, leaning into that protection that his offensive line can give him. Not for nothing, the Saints' offensive line has had its ups and downs this season. But, if they can find a happy medium, look for Spencer Rattler to settle comfortably into the pocket and not look to utilize his legs as much. So 2 very weird bets for these 2 rookie quarterbacks. Now let's switch over to the skill position players, because they kind of feel like they'll be left by the wayside because everyone's attention will be on these 2 guys in this game. Let's look at Alvin Kamara in this game. Let's talk a little bit about him, because he is someone, right, who had a great start to the season, but in recent weeks kind of fell by the wayside or lost his luster a little bit in this offense. For no particular reason, I think, either. It's just because I feel like the Saints were panicking that their offensive game plan didn't work for longer, and so they abandoned it. And so that's why I feel like we haven't seen that much of Alvin Kamara the past weeks. However, in this game, I certainly feel like, if the Saints are looking to settle down Spencer Rattler, a big part of it will also be through either the run game or the screen game with him. He's always a nice little outlet for any quarterback. He always makes himself available in desperate situations for the offense. And that's the reason why he's still such an X factor for the Saints, no matter who's playing the quarterback position going forward for them. And he's going to have over 73.5 rush yards in this game, minus 115. He's going to supply the rush yards, while I feel like Spencer Rattler's going to settle in comfortably as a passer. That's how I feel like going forward you can get the best out of both of these players, learn more about Rattler, but also utilize perhaps your best weapon on the offensive side of the football in Kamara if you're the Saints. So look for Alvin Kamara to really be the difference maker for the Saints offense, or the guy who can alter this game in the Saints' favor, should Spencer Rattler not feel comfortable, because he can settle everything down in an instant for this offense. But then we go over to the other running back who Andre mentioned in my previous segment in terms of his fantasy team. And Javonte Williams, not for nothing, I still think he'll have a big game, but I actually think he's going to hit the under in rushing yards. I feel like a lot of the Broncos' offense is going to be very push-pull. There are going to be moments where they're going to want to maybe lean a little bit more into the running game to play a little bit more ball control offense, but there will be moments where you're going to get the erratic, unpredictable Bo Nix in this game, because it's not going to be a pretty kind of operation for the Broncos moving forward. But I think Javonte Williams, what he will do great in is that Andre said Javonte should have a great game. I'm not saying he's going to have a bad game because I'm saying he's hitting the under. I feel like he's going to influence this game very positively for Bo Nix if Bo Nix needs him, if you know what I mean. Because he is a nice little security blanket in the receiving game. People don't understand how good of a receiving back Javonte Williams is, because of the fact that he hasn't really had an opportunity in a competent offense to prove it. So I think that for all perhaps his deficiencies in the running game, I think he's going to have a huge game in the receiving game. And I feel like it will settle Bo Nix down on the drives where he is looking to make it simple for himself, and maybe Sean Payton making it simpler for him as well. But at the end of the day, you're going to get the most usage and production out of Javonte Williams, not just as a running back, but as a receiving back as well. Because what I've seen in this Broncos running back room is a lot of questions about its ability in the open field after contact. And if you simplify both the run game and the screen game to kind of combo Nix down, it will just make this offense look a lot smoother going forward. So look for Javonte Williams to be a very versatile player, but perhaps not in the ways you expect. Speaking to Andre's point, he will have a good game. I honestly believe so. But it's not going to be in a predictable way, because that's not the way the 2024 Denver Broncos operate. I feel like Javonte Williams' best production will come from the receiving game, actually. Minus 110. Take the under in rushing yards. And then the last player that I want to go over before we take a quick break is Courtland Sutton. Perhaps the best receiver in this Denver Broncos squad, but we really don't know, because there have been so many inconsistencies in the past game. There have been some very, like I said, high highs, but very low lows. And not for nothing, I feel like the Denver Broncos receiving room, even in the Russell Wilson era, never really found its footing outside of a guy like Courtland Sutton. So going forward, maybe that's the problem that will best help us determine whether or not the Denver Broncos are a playoff team. If anyone outside of Courtland Sutton can step up in that receiver room. Because I could even really name any Broncos receivers. Marvin Mims maybe, if he's still there. But I'm not sure that anyone can rise up to the challenge of being another weapon for Bo Nix. I mean, that's something that the Denver Broncos can fix and adjust moving forward. But in this game, look for Courtland Sutton to still have a very big game at over 44.5 receiving yards at minus 110. Because, not for nothing, I feel like he's going to be the receiver, whether it's big play or intermediate play, that I feel like Bo Nix is going to develop the rapport with, not just this season, but for the next couple seasons, for as long as Bo Nix is their starting quarterback. And so, Yes, I would love to see someone else step up, but the fact of the matter is, settling down a rookie quarterback definitely involves finding him a consistent weapon. And I feel like Bo Nix is starting to trust Courtland Sutton a lot in the system. Maybe there will come a time when I just now remembered Troy Franklin, his former college teammate at Oregon, steps into that role. But for now, I feel like Courtland Sutton is the weapon that the Broncos can really look into as someone who can settle down Bo Nix. And we saw it a little bit in their last game against the Chargers. That's why I mentioned them prematurely. But I feel like going forward, he seems like the simplest player to bet on in this Broncos offense, whether in fantasy or if you're betting in real life. But let me know what you think in the comments about this game, because it's very weird. But coming up next, we're switching gears a little bit, concluding my rankings, my positional rankings for this week in fantasy football with my tight ends, and then we get into our defense and special teams. But first, the tight ends right after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free.
Hello everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Like I said before the break, we're switching gears a little bit, concluding our positional ranking with the weekend, for this fantasy football weekend rather, with my tight ends first, and then for my next segment it will be my defenses and special teams units. But for the tight ends, this seems like a very simple week for the tight end position, I feel like. A lot of guys who I'm really excited to see in a lot of different situations, and most importantly, I feel like they're in this period of time where, we now can gauge them properly and know that they can either be the guys we always thought they could be, consistent by a week-by-week basis, or we know that they're busts. And some of these guys, have had up and down starts this season. But for the most part, I feel like we've gotten a sense of who they can be. And especially with the matchups that they're facing this week, are the four guys who I would say are pretty immediate starts. Without further ado, let's get into it. Let me know what you think in the comments of your own kind of personal tight end rankings for this week. But these are mine. Starting off with a guy who I feel like the Browns need to utilize a lot more than they have this season, and that is David Njoku, going up against the Bengals. Yet again, a terrible defense. Yes, they played well against the Giants, but don't let that fool you. I still think there are a lot of deficiencies, a lot of things that this Cincinnati Bengals team needs to fix on the defensive side of the football. But the reason why I feel like David Njoku hasn't been getting a lot of respect in the fantasy realm is because of the fact you can't necessarily trust the Browns offense. And the sad part of it is, Kevin Stefanski, I know he really trusts him as an offensive weapon. And now that Amari Cooper's gone, you need to trust him even more. But at the end of the day, I feel like last season, with an actual competent quarterback, you could get a lot more value out of David Njoku than with Deshaun Watson. And so, if there are no fundamental changes for the Browns offense outside of moving Amari Cooper and hoping that Deshaun Watson magically turns into his 2020 self, then I feel like you're always going to take a risk with David Njoku. But the reason why, in this game in particular, he can have a lot of upside is because of that Bengals defense. Now more than ever, as Andy said, Laporte is my tight end one this week. Minnesota really bad versus tight ends. We'll see, because the guy I'm going to talk about next is a guy you're very familiar with in terms of his play against the Vikings and because of your fandom as well, Mr. Andre. But for David Njoku, I feel like this Bengals defense really has been able to stop anyone. And not for nothing, I could have mentioned Nick Chubb potentially coming back for this offense this week and having an impact in the run game because the Bengals' run defense is also appalling. But David Njoku has to be the guy for the Browns offense. He has to be the X factor if they want to have any modicum of success this season. So that's the reason why I feel like David Njoku could have a big game this week. It's just dependent on how the Browns offense and how Kevin Stefanski utilizes him or respects him even. But then getting into who we were kind of alluding to when you referred to Minnesota struggles with tight ends going into this game against the Texans is Tucker Kraft, a guy who last week kind of had a down week, of course, but going up against the Texans, I feel like he's going to get back into the guy who is now becoming a hidden gem in fantasy. A lot of people probably were underestimating this Packers tight end room because of the fact they had a lot of receivers and the receiver depth was so impressive, as Andre already shouts out his man Tucker Kraft in the comments. I feel like, Kraft week in, week out is always going to be a difficult matchup no matter how all the Packers receivers play. Because at the end of the day, at least one or two of these Packers receivers are going to have a big game. But Tucker Kraft, you can't necessarily forget about him if you're an opposing defense. He's just a physical guy who can play in the open field, in the red zone, and is a matchup nightmare for any defense, especially for the Texans. Not for nothing, I like the Texans secondary a lot. It's a young, scrappy secondary, pretty good in both man and zone coverage, but you can't really account for a guy like Tucker Kraft, especially if you're a little bit more zone heavy like the Texans have been becoming this season. So look for Kraft to be very exploitative this week in the way he runs his routes and the way I feel the Packers will utilize him. Even if he doesn't have that many catches or targets in this game, he's going to impact this game in some positive way. But I feel like he could be an immediate start because if the Texans forget about him, look out. So Tucker Kraft, take him in this matchup, even though it might be a weird one because of the Texans secondary. Then another one that I'm kind of mad that I have to mention here, but it is a matchup that I feel like Kyle Pitts can win going up against my Seattle Seahawks. And not for nothing, a lot of people will still kind of disrespect Kyle Pitts in fantasy because, yes, he was a high draft pick. Yes, everyone was thinking, well, even with a bad quarterback, why aren't you playing up to this lofty standard? I still feel like Kyle Pitts has had an impressive start to his career. And now with Kirk Cousins at the helm, he's going to have a lot more big games. Maybe not as big as other weapons in this Falcons offense because they have a lot of mouths to feed, and Kirk has been trying to do as good a job as anyone with all these weapons. And he's doing a pretty good job too. So kudos to Kirk Cousins for all that. But Kyle Pitts in this game, I feel like the main problem with the Seahawks defense is that all their coverages are very soft and lenient. I know that the run defense is going to get the most flack, but the secondary as well. There's a lot of gaps in how they run this defense. And yes, eventually, when with all these injuries that they have, when all those players come back, there might be a little bit more success for them. But until that day, I feel like running backs and tight ends against the Seahawks will have a field day. And that's just the nature of this defense at its current state. Until, Mike McDonald gets all the pieces he needs and implements his schemes fully, I can't see a world where guys like Bijan and Pitts in this game will not succeed. So I really like this matchup for Kyle Pitts, as much as I hate to say it, for the Seahawks. As Peyton enters the chat, or Pate enters the chat, welcome, my man, how are you? Should I drop one of Dak Prescott, as he says he has Caleb Williams as well, Christian Kirk, or Dobbs, to pick up Jerry Jeudy? I feel like that's an interesting question because while I feel like Jerry Jeudy can be a major factor now in the Browns offense, I don't see how, as he also asks about Dobbs or Javonte Williams being a starter for this week in a PPR league, I don't see how Jerry Jeudy can positively impact this offense now, even without Amari Cooper, if there's still so many questions about Deshaun Watson. Until there's more consistency from the QB position in Cleveland, I can't put that much weight in any of the skill position players that they have at their disposal. Even a guy like Nick Chubb, who a lot of people could say could be the saving grace for them. I can't place weight on any of them. And not for nothing, all of these guys, even someone like Christian Kirk, who I've heavily criticized in this show before, are very valuable. I like Caleb. I like Dak, even though, he has been very problematic this season. And Dobbs is someone who, week by week, could be a surprise any given Sunday. So I feel like if you were to try and pick up Jeudy with either one of these players, maybe Dak could be the one. But I just don't see how Jerry Jeudy's value skyrockets if there's still questions about this Browns offense, and now maybe more so now that Amari Cooper's gone. So that's just my opinion of it, but if you were to go through with it, I would feel most comfortable out of all the players you mentioned giving up Dak, because he has been pretty problematic this season for Dallas. In terms of your question about Dobbs or Devontae, I feel like this week, both of them are in interesting matchups, but like I said, Javonte, especially in a PPR league this week, could have a unique opportunity to have a surprising game for everyone concerned. Even if you're not a heavy Broncos fan, or even if you're just a casual fantasy football player, Javonte Adams can do things in the passing game for Bo Nix that not a lot of running backs can do for guys like Bo Nix in this league. I think that a lot of what's going to happen tonight is going to stem from how well Javonte Williams translates into that receiving game. Because if, Bo Nix is erratic, he's going to need an outlet somewhere. And so if Javonte Williams can't be that guy tonight, then I really don't know how much value he's going to add in a PPR league going forward, because that's where most of his value stems from. But I still think that he adds a lot of value. Whereas Dobbs, like I said, he's a very volatile guy. As much as I love him, and I feel like he's one of the more underrated receivers in that room for Green Bay, I still think that week by week, I don't know if I've seen enough to fully trust him as someone I would start this week. So I will pick Javonte, and also for that potential trade for Jerry Jeudy, Dak will be the guy going forward. As Andre also mentioned, it's a terrible offer. Some guy offered me Justin Jefferson and Goddard for Garrett Wilson, Brian Thomas, and Laporta. It's not the worst offer, but I do feel like losing Laporta in it, then I feel like would be highly detrimental to your team. But then again, as Pate says, thank you, you're awesome. Thank you, my man. But going back to Andre's thing, I think that it still is an interesting trade because I like Jefferson a lot. He's a superstar receiver. And Goddard, not for nothing, when he's healthy, has been perhaps one of the best offensive weapons for Philly this season. So it's really about how you feel about Garrett Wilson and Brian Thomas going forward and how much value they have to your team. But it's not the worst trade, but it is teetering towards pretty bad because of Laporta being in it. Trying to sneak in Laporta while offering, potentially two guys who, while pretend to be superstars in this season, aren't necessarily going to help you if your team is already so stacked. That's the reason why I can't really buy into it completely. But it's up to you in terms of how you feel Wilson and Thomas will play out, because those are the X factors there in that trade. But to conclude a little bit of my tight end segment, as I honestly said I could do it, but IDK training Laporta scares me, although Jake Ferguson is my backup. I do, though, like that tight end room of, if you go through with it, Goddard and Ferguson, because they're very balanced. But then again, Laporta isn't a whole world talent at the position. No matter what's going on with that Detroit Lions offense, he just adds so much value to a fantasy team. But I do want to get to my last tight end here with Travis Kelce versus the 49ers. You know, Travis Kelce, much like Sam Laporta, is still someone I have a lot of trust in my fantasy team, even though this year has been very shaky for him to start off. But then again, I look at the Chiefs and I look at the opportunities he has, and I feel like Travis Kelce doesn't necessarily need to be an all-world tight end. He just needs to be a competent security blanket for Patrick Mahomes if things go awry, and let these receivers grow, let these receivers do their thing, and this Chiefs defense will be fine. And this Chiefs offense will be fine, rather. And going against the 49ers, it's not as threatening of a game as I think it would be. But I do think that Travis Kelce with the job done. Before we go take a quick break, though, I do want to address this final comment by Andre here. Here's my lineup with Jefferson. It'll be Josh Allen, Derrick Henry, K9, Jamar Chase, Jefferson, Josh Downs, Chris Olave, Jake Ferguson, and Mason in my flex. Should I do it? I feel like that would be a fantastic team. I see no reason as to why you shouldn't do it. But then again, it's all about Garrett Wilson and Brian Thomas. That's all I can say. If you're really confident that both of these guys are sell-high guys, then by all means do it. And it wouldn't really change your team all that much. In fact, it will make it still as strong as it was before. But then again, I can't see a world in which you give up Laporta with it. So if you try and take away Laporta, negotiate that way, I still think you'll be able to get the trade through, and your team would still be good and wouldn't suffer from it either way. So as long as you feel like giving up Laporta along with those two guys that I think should be sold high at this point, then I don't see why not. This trade certainly feels like one that you definitely should win going forward, because it doesn't necessarily hurt your team, but it's all about those two players in that trade. That's all I have to say. But we do have to take a quick break. When we come back on the other side, I conclude my positional rankings with my defenses and special teams. We'll be right back after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Before we get into our fourth segment of the day here, I do want to mention some comments from Andre that we got before the break. When Olave comes back, my receivers are insane. Chase, Jefferson, and Olave he would have. And he also was saying, in terms of the Goddard deal, or part of the deal, Doug could craft this on waivers as well if I wanted to drop Goddard for him. I feel like you answer the questions better than me, man. You perhaps pretty proactive in terms of how you think about your team, so I wouldn't necessarily worry about this trade either way. My only concern was, in fact, what was tripping me up was those two guys, Garrett Wilson and Brian Thomas, because who knows, maybe become all-world players out of these dire situations they're in, and you might regret it, but it's still not one where your team is definitely hurt because of. So I feel like if you're proactive about it, then this trade should potentially go through, and could potentially go through and be very beneficial to you and potentially to him as well, but who knows. Now for our fourth segment of the day, we are concluding our positional rankings with the top defenses and special teams this weekend. And I feel about the same way about defenses that I do about tight ends. We're starting to get a clear picture of who each of them are. And not for nothing, these four defenses are defenses you're probably sick and tired of hearing about week in, week out, but they are some of the best in the league. There are two here that I'm kind of iffy about, as Andre says my backup receivers are Ridley and Downs, but I was thinking about Ridley for Juju Smith-Schuster. I need the Chris trade approval. I feel like, the trade can go through. I feel like this is a trade that could potentially benefit both parties, but on your side of things, from what I've seen, it doesn't necessarily hurt you. So, and besides, I feel like you have a pretty good contingency plan going forward, and your backup receivers, you don't necessarily need them because of the fact your 3 starting receivers are some of the best in the league. So, I feel like this trade, I willingly approve. It's a reject, by the way, and he sent me the offer. So I feel like this trade is approved by me at the very least. So you do get the much needed Chris trade approval going forward. But ultimately, I feel like you have a pretty good contingency plan going forward. But getting back to our defenses and special teams units here, all 4 of these defenses I like, but there are 2, like I said, who I'm a little bit iffy on. But according to the matchups, I feel like they potentially can put up big stats for you as your defense for this week. But starting off with my first defense that I want to mention, how about the Vikings defense going up against the Lions? I feel like, coming off a bye, it's kind of hard to imagine a world where the Vikings defense will look wholly like the one we saw for the first 5 weeks of the season. As I said, he's trying to finesse me a little, but Goddard's going to be out a few weeks. I think it's worth the risk because, like you said, if Tucker Kraft is on waivers, then Goddard's the least of your concern. You are still trying to get Jefferson, and I feel like that part of the trade will be papered over anyways because all of your players are going to be in a good position, and you know more about your team potentially than I do. So I feel like this trade, when everyone's healthy, clearly benefits you in a way that, doesn't necessarily help or hurt in any one way or another. So I feel like this trade you should feel comfortable with, even if, you want to keep Goddard, let's say, instead of going for Tucker Kraft on waivers. But that's just all my advice. Good luck to you in this trade. I feel like you should go through with it, as he did mention he just accepted it. So we'll see how it plays out. I wish you the best of luck with that trade. But going back to our defense, talking about the Vikings, like I said, it is kind of risky coming off a bye week to pick a team in the Vikings who have a lot of momentum, but now we're going up against the toughest team they've probably faced, especially in a divisional encounter. But the thing about the Vikings defense is that it feels like it's well equipped for situations like this at this point. They've already beaten very similar offenses in both the 49ers and the Texans, and they've already beaten a divisional opponent. And as Ani said, I feel like having Jamar and Jefferson together is just something I can't deny, and that's why I feel like that part of the trade is what makes it so special. You have 2 of the best receivers in the league and your wide receiver room, and not for nothing, I feel like even if one of them goes down, God forbid, you still have Chase and Olave, who are 2 guys, or Jefferson and Olave, who week in, week out, you should rely upon, and it offers you that balance too. But going back to these defenses here, Vikings, I feel like this one is one that's a little bit risky, but one I myself can't deny in terms of this matchup. Then going into our next defense, I feel like the Steelers defense has kind of flown surprisingly under the radar, in my opinion, this year, going up against the Jets. And I feel like I said before, the Devontae Adams move, it can go either way, but at least in my opinion, it's not one that really moves me that much, just because I feel like it's a slight to players like Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, and I feel that this move will just create more tension, because as much as this Jets team could be all about Aaron Rodgers being happy and getting his buddies back together, Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall proved that they could be franchise cornerstones without him, with even worse quarterback play than you can imagine. And not for nothing, Aaron Rodgers has been pretty bad this season himself at the quarterback position. So it feels kind of weird and unsettling to go out and get Davante Adams. As Andre said, just an unnecessary move in my opinion. I agree. I feel like the Steelers' defense is one that can take advantage of the situation. Because at this point, I don't know what to think of the Jets with or without Rodgers. Honestly, it's going to help Wilson, though I believe they cannot double team anymore. I agree with that statement, but I still think that Garrett Wilson won't like the situation either way. So that's why I feel the Steelers will take this advantage in this matchup, because they are just a defense who, week in, week out, proves that they are one of, if not the best defense in the league. And I just feel like there are too many question marks around the Jets anyways for me to really fully buy into them with or without Davante Adams. But then the third defense that I kind of wanted to touch upon is the Rams defense going up against the Raiders coming off the bye week. This is a weird game, and the Rams are one of the two defenses I'm going to mention in this segment that I feel a little less comfortable in starting, but I still feel like in this matchup they do have the upper hand, and this is a perfect opportunity for this young group to settle in. Because when I think of the Rams defense, it's not that it's been overall bad and something that can't be improved upon. It's just that these players haven't had that much experience together. They haven't really been in a situation where they can really benefit from having a game like this one. But going forward, I just feel like the Rams defense is going to get better and better. I like their depth up front with both Verse and Fisk, and I like their back end as well. I like all these guys, and it's just a matter of coming together, as Andre agrees, in that the defense is so young. Spring chickens, he calls them. I feel like the Rams defense, not for nothing, is still one that I'm going to appreciate at the year's end. Because even as a Seattle Seahawks fan, as much as I don't want them to succeed, I feel like they're just going to grow year in and year out. I think Verse and Fisk, the sky's the limit for both of them. And I feel like week in, week out, as the schedule potentially lightens up a little bit, we're going to see what this Rams defense is capable of going forward. So I think this Raiders game is a good place to start for them going forward in terms of building that trust, building that rapport, most importantly, getting valuable reps against a team they feel like they compete. As Andre also agrees, I think over time they can be very good, he says. And I agree completely with that, because changing that, as Andre said, the pro of the league is trying to veto the trade. Well, I feel like either way, whether it doesn't go through or goes through, your team is still good enough to compete in any fantasy football league. So I wouldn't necessarily look into that veto too much, but it is, as he says, it's that really unfair trade. It kind of is, because Jefferson is such a very important player in fantasy, but I still think you're gonna get the trade through, and even if it does get vetoed, then I wouldn't really care that much, because your receivers room, like I said, is stacked. So I feel like either way, it's a win-win for you, because your team still is good if you don't get this trade to go through, and will be even better if this trade does go through. So you have to take your lump sometimes in fantasy, week in, week out. But the last defense that I want to go through is actually your defense. As Ani said, the guy is 2 and 4th, no depth though. Well, it is what it is. I feel like when a trade like that comes up, you have to kind of question a little bit. But I feel like it has to go through. And the league, no matter what, is going to see that in the end, either way, your team is not going to be overwhelmingly affected outside of the fact your receiver room just gets better. It just makes, a great team an elite team. It's not like it's an completely altering trade either, because you're still sending a lot in return, including Laporta. So it is something that I feel like we'll have to go through no matter what. So I don't think you have to worry about it that much. But then the final defense is actually one you are all too familiar with, my man, Packers going up against the Texans. I actually think that even though it was kind of bashing the Packers defense yesterday in terms of that matchup between the Texans and the secondary of the Packers, I feel like what I like about this matchup for the Packers is that if, Stroud kind of gets a little uncomfortable, without Nico Collins against a tougher defense than what he faced in New England, then there are opportunities for the Packers to do what they've done this season, and that is generate takeaways. And that adds a lot of value to me from a fantasy perspective, but I can understand why people might be a little apprehensive to start them, because they're a defense that definitely is too reliant on that aspect of their game. And going forward, I would love to see more of the pass rush getting home. But at the end of the day, this is kind of one of those matchups where in man-to-man coverage, if Stroud gets a little bit erratic, there's a chance or two for this Packers defense to record a couple interceptions. So that's why I feel like a lot of value is interesting. But let me know what you think in the comments. Coming up next, though, to conclude my show, we do want to switch over to college football a little bit, talk about some of the Week 8 matchups from a betting perspective to close out today's show. We'll be right back after this short break to talk about that. Hello everyone, and welcome back into our final segment of the day here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. A lot just happened in the brief couple minutes or seconds that we had over this short break, including a comment from Andre that I'll address first, but then we have some breaking news on the Saints front of things, as in the end I'm victorious if I lose week in and week out with this team. I'll just accept it. Yeah, I feel like this team going forward is one that you should feel comfortable in, with or without Jefferson, just because, Chase and Olave is still a very deep receiver room. And not for nothing, even though your backup receivers are a little iffy, you can get a couple good games out of both of them. I like Ridley and Downs enough to trust them as well at the backup position. But I do want to get into this breaking news concerning the Saints. Rashid Shaheed expected to have season-ending knee surgery, so make of that what you will. Shocking news on the front for the New Orleans Saints. Definitely affects how I think about this game from a betting perspective, because Rashid is someone who I like as a deep ball threat, but maybe not as much for Spencer Rattler as perhaps for Derek Carr. But he still is someone who, if you wanted to take that deep shot, and shock a lot of opposing defenses, that was a huge part of what the Saints potentially wanted to do. So we hope for a speedy recovery on that front for him, and we wish him the best, but it definitely makes me think entirely differently of what this game could be tomorrow. But we are going to end the show, though, on a college football front with a little bit of a Week 8 betting preview. A lot of exciting games in the world of college football as we get deeper and deeper into the season. We thought Week 7 was exciting. Week 8 even more. So without further ado, let's end the show on a good note with some college football. Starting off with a big game of the weekend at DKR in Austin, Texas. Number 1 Texas, the 3.5-point favorite. First time Georgia has ever been a underdog in the last 50 games. Pretty impressive stuff. The over-under 55.5 points, UGA plus 140, Texas minus 165 to win. And I feel like the big question in this game for Texas is if Quinn Ewers, as Anya said, the man the Saints are done for. They got off to a fast start for nothing. Yeah, man, like, I'm still shocked by this news. Like, I don't know how I could sit here and talk about college football when such prescient news for the Saints for tomorrow night's game especially is just fallen into my lap. So it is something that we do have to kind of think about, because the Saints look like a team that were going to be something this year, but now look where they're at now. As Andre said, bro, I kind of think Georgia pulled this off. As a Texas fan, I'm kind of hoping they don't, but you're right in some regard, because the big question for Texas is, Andre said, gut feeling. I feel like the big question for Texas is Quinn Ewers fully right? Because in that game against Oklahoma, there were moments where he did look rusty, especially at the start of the game, where he had that sack and then was immediately intercepted afterwards. But he did kind of settle down. But it's going to be all about, if he doesn't look good in this game, does Sark turn to Arch? And that's the big question, because Texas fans have been very vocal about their opinions. And so if Quinn doesn't look right to start the game and they fall behind early, then potentially we could see a hook in this game for Quinn. As much as I love him and respect him for all he's done for the program, it is what it is right now because of what Arch has done this season. And then for the Georgia side of things, what version of Beck fully shows up? Because he has been a very Jekyll and Hyde quarterback. There have been a lot of highs. We talked about his performance against Mississippi State this past weekend in terms of stat-wise looking very impressive, but also the mistakes he made in that game. And some of the mistakes he's made, especially against Alabama and in other games as well, where he's looked like the accurate precision passer we thought he would be coming into the season, but he's also looked like an erratic guy who we didn't see last season. So, if Carson Beck can pick apart this Texas defense, there will be an opportunity for Georgia to pull this off, like Andre said. But it's going to all come down to whether or not, the Texas defense, as they've proven week in, week out, is for real. Because this is the toughest test they face on the defensive side of the football, facing Carson Beck, no matter how he's looked this season. So it's going to be all about whether or not Texas can take advantage if Carson Beck looks erratic, but also on the offensive side of the football for Texas, whether or not Quinn Ewers can be the big game guy he's been in the past, because it's the biggest game of his career outside of that Alabama game last year. And the lights are going to be brighter, so it's going to be on his shoulders really in this game. And if he doesn't succeed, look for Texas fans to be chanting, "We want Arch" in this game. I'm completely serious as someone who knows Texas for these past couple of years. It is what it is for them. But going up next in this college football weekend from betting perspective, how about Miami going to Louisville? Interesting game because Miami's coming off a bye week. They are a 4-point favorite on the road. The over-under is 61.5. Minus 190 to win is Miami, and Louisville at plus 100. I feel like this game shouldn't necessarily be a trap game for Miami, but the way I see it is, I don't know how much pressure, as Andre said, quick question, should I start Downs or Juju this week? I'm going to miss Brian Thomas Jr. I feel like I don't have the matchups in front of me this week. If I pull them up, we can really see who has the better one. But I feel like Juju feels like the better option here as we pull up the games. Although Brian Thomas Jr. is actually playing this week against the Patriots, which is an easy matchup. But if you do want to switch things up, the Colts are playing the Dolphins. Should be an interesting matchup for Josh Downs. But if Richardson plays, I maybe not be as high on him. And the Chiefs obviously play the 49ers in an interesting game there, and a very tough game for them. So, actually, I would say Brian Thomas Jr. could start out of all of them, if you want my honest opinion, because he has the easiest matchup. But if you want to bench him for this week, then Josh Downs, willingly, as Juju says, plays Niners, Downs plays Miami, like I said. So if you do want to bench Brian Thomas Jr., even though he has perhaps the easiest matchup out of all three of these guys, I would begrudgingly say Josh Downs, even though I don't know how he'll look with Anthony Richardson back in the mix in this game. So make of it what you will. Take my advice with a grain of salt. But I feel like Brian Thomas Jr., out of all of them, does have the best matchup. But I'm not sure if you might say missing him because of injury. I might have to look into that as well for you. But if you do want to bench Brian Thomas Jr. for whatever reason, then Josh Downs would be the play. But going back to this that's right. I don't have Thomas Jr. anymore after the trade. Stuck choosing Juju or Downs until Olave comes back. I don't know where my mind went on that one. So I would say Downs would be the guy going forward just because, in terms of matchups, the Colts have an easier one. But it's a reluctant kind of choice because of the fact I don't know how Anthony Richardson will look. But then again, going back to this Miami-Louisville game here, I would like Miami taking all the points in this game. But I feel like Louisville's one of those tough ACC teams where they really can hurt you many different ways. Tyler Schaff, their transfer quarterback, a lot of college football experience in many different conferences. So he can keep them in this game, and not for nothing. I'm a little bit worried about Miami's defense going forward. So at the end of the day, look for this game to be a little bit closer than you might think. But I still like Miami in this game. Maybe not taking all the points, though, from a betting perspective. Then the third one I want to cover is this Nebraska-Indiana game. Because the winner of this game shockingly remains a player in the Big Ten race. This is a hugely important game. A lot of people might not understand that. But in Bloomington, in Indiana, 4-point favorites, over under 51.5, Nebraska plus 160, Indiana minus 140. And these two teams are two teams that play highly effective on the offensive side of the ball, have two quarterbacks in both Raiola and Curtis Rourke who have been shockingly effective, and opportunistic defenses who can keep them in the game and anything. Not for nothing. Yes, their schedules will get a lot more hard, but for the time being, this game is going to be the most important on their schedule. Win this game. If you're Indiana, remain undefeated. If you're Nebraska, get a very important win in terms of staying in the Big Ten race. And everything on your schedule becomes more manageable. Indiana still has, I believe, Penn State and Ohio State coming up at the end of the year. But for now, I really am going to take a lot of stock in this game. And if you ask who I think will win it, I actually think Indiana has the upper hand here. They have the more experienced quarterback. They're at home. And I really like the makeup of their team. They've really built something there on the defensive side of the football. They're physically strong as well. But I'm looking for a very exciting Big Ten a Big Ten game that means a lot more than people might expect. And the final game here before we end today's show, another big one in the SEC. Potentially another one to keep either one of these teams in the SEC race and maybe even just the CFP race as well. Alabama, 2.5-point favorites, actually on the road against Tennessee. Over under 55.5 in this one. And this one just feels very weird in my opinion because I don't know what version of Nico Iamaleava we will see for Tennessee in this game. Whether he's going to play it safe on the offensive side of the football, or it's going to get back to what we saw early in the season when he looked like one of the best college football quarterbacks in the nation. But on the Alabama side of things, I just want to see them play a complete game again. I just want to see them get back to what they did against Georgia, where on the offensive side of football, Jalen Miller was on. His connection with Ryan Williams looked great, and they just got back to playing their style of football. If they don't play it against the Tennessee defense that might just be perhaps the best in the SEC, then chances are they lose another big game here. And chances are they might not even contend for the SEC championship and might not even get into the CFP. This is a very important game for Alabama on the road in Knoxville against a tough defense, and they can't get dragged into Tennessee's game here. So that's why I feel like this game will be closer. That being said, I am going to still pick Alabama. Let me know what you think in the comments, because that will just about do it for today's show here. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Thank you all for watching. If you want more content like this, like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network. Check out my fellow podcasters as well. They're doing great things in their own right for the network. But also, if you want to interact more directly, as Andre has done, kudos to my man Andre, a fan from day one, ever since we went live. Keep making yourselves available to, as honestly what's happened in Tennessee these past few weeks. I will take this question. The hype has died down. I don't know, really. I think it's just a question of Josh Heupel's decision making with Nico, whether or not he actually fully trusts him, because it looked like he really trusts his defense, and it's shown because they've been one of the best defenses in the nation. But I don't know if he trusts Nico fully yet, even though Nico has shown that he can run this offense very well. So I don't really know what to think of Tennessee. But going into this game, I think their defense can do enough to keep them in it. So I'm not sure. But thank you for your comments again. If you want to, like Andre, continue to interact directly with the show, keep on making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way to contribute to the show and make it even better. With that being said, we'll be back here tomorrow, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, as always, with another great show. I've been Chris Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm out for today.